Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, welcome back. It's an honor for me to moderate this distinguished panel on the very important subject, of course, sustainable development and the development agenda beyond 2015. Before I introduce the theme, I'm pleased to welcome our panelists, and I will introduce them in the order they will speak, briefly, 7 minutes each, at particular questions that I will pose to them. First of all, His Excellency Mr. Gordon Darcy Lillo, Prime Minister of Solomon Islands. His Excellency Dr. Thongloun Sisoulith, Deputy Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. Her Excellency Ms. Emilia Pires, Minister of Finance of Timor-Leste. And His Excellency Dr. Jiku Luveni, Minister for Social Welfare, Women. Her Excellency Minister for Social Welfare, Women and Poverty Alleviation of Fiji, and Her Excellency Mrs. Dagubati Purandasavari, Minister of State for Commerce and Industry of India. Before I direct my questions to the panel, allow me to make some reflections on the subject. And I will speak informally, and I hope we can maintain during the next hour or so an interactive character of this discussion. When I listened to the speeches this morning, I was struck by the fact that Asia and your part of the world will have a decisive influence on the development not only of your own region, but also of the world. We all know about the geopolitical and geoeconomic changes in the world, and how we form the agenda for the period after 2015 is extremely important. It's a daunting task, but it's also an inspiring task. And for that agenda to be really meaningful, it has to have both a global dimension, which I will represent now in my introductory remarks, but of course also a very strong regional dimension and a national dimension, and I would even say a local dimension. Have you thought about the fact that global and local are seen as very contradictory? I have a very special take on that. I say, have you thought of the fact that global is somebody else's local? And this shows how much we are bound together. First of all, I'd like to say a few words about the Millennium Development Goals. They were established in the year 2000, and they are to be achieved by 2015. We have seen some progress. I think you in Asia have, particularly this region, have contributed enormously to the reduction of extreme poverty. So the figures on extreme poverty have gone down, although inequalities are very evident. We have also seen great progress in education. Particularly the period 1990 to 2008 in Africa was a tremendously important step forward for education, particularly primary education. Practically every country in the world now lives up to its obligations to have mandatory primary education. That's one of the most important investments in the future, as we understand. But then, of course, there are very grave deficiencies, not only the inequalities that I mentioned, but also some sectors are really going very poorly. Maternal health, for instance, is lagging behind, and we need really to take important steps forward for maternal health. And then I would also point to an area which I follow extremely closely, and that is water and sanitation. If we are to achieve the goals by the present pace for sanitation, we will have to wait to the year 2075. And we really need to speed up the implementation of the goals, particularly those most lagging. And that's why the Secretary General reminded the world that a couple of weeks ago there was exactly 1,000 days left to achieve the MDGs. We have now about 980 days left to speed up this implementation. And I personally, on his behalf, launched a drive for sanitation, an action drive for sanitation. Absolutely crucial. If we move on sanitation, we achieve so much more in other areas. We reduce child mortality, we improve maternal health, we increase the gender equality, we bring about better education for girls, we reduce extreme poverty. In other words, going for one goal like this, the one of sanitation, same thing goes for education, by the way. You have multiplication effects in so many other sectors. Now, what are the new conditions? I envy sometimes my colleagues back in the year 2000 because they had a Millennium Declaration and then they established 8 Millennium Development Goals rather quickly. I think it took them 2 weeks. Now this time we have a very elaborate process ahead, but it's also because the world environment is so much drastically changing. It's not a banality to say that we live in a new world. You know, if you look at you in this room and your children are the first one in history who have to face up to the existential threat of this planet being in danger. Climate change, sea rise, which is affecting my neighbor's country on the right here. So obviously that we have, for the first time in history, an existential threat. I have spent much of my life in conflicts, mediation tasks, humanitarian disasters. I've negotiated 5 or 6 conflicts. I have a dream. Well, it sounds somewhat pretentious, but a dream that would be that we would now start a negotiation to make peace with nature. We need to make peace with nature. The way we have handled the resources, the robbery of the world, of the planet's resources, and the direction that we have on climate change is such that we really have to launch a project, which I would try to launch in this room for the first time, the need for peace with nature. If we in different ways can show that we have to be in tune with both our people, our people's need, but also our planet's need. And the other new factors are obvious also. Migration, massive scale, urbanization, 60% of humanity will live in cities very soon. The quick pace of technology change, the communications revolution, which affects us in practically all areas, and of course the risk of financial crisis in a very volatile situation. All this are leading us to the conclusion, in my view, that we are faced with a new normal. We have a new normal to adapt to, and that's the environment in which we now go to the next stage, post-2015. What are then the elements for post-2015? Well, the obvious continued challenge will be poverty eradication. I wish we didn't have that uppermost in the agenda, but we have to. And not only poverty eradication globally, but also internally, because we have these inequalities. I claim that inequalities are not only unfair, I think they're also dangerous. Inequalities are dangerous. So for our own security, let's deal with inequalities. That goal has to be there, probably very practical. I hope it will be something like the present MDGs, which will be concrete, substantial. Then, of course, we have to have sustainability. And for sustainability, we have work going on now in the member states. Your colleagues in New York are working hard on the Sustainable Development Goals. We will also receive reports right now, soon, from the high-level panel, in which Emilia Perez is a member. We have the UNDP coming in with national consultations. We have our regional economic commissions coming in with their contribution, and the road will now be prepared for a high-level event in New York on the 25th of September. And then, of course, the member states will have the main responsibilities for the road ahead. And I would hope that the Sustainable Development Goals process will merge later on with the poverty eradication goals. I don't see any contradiction between poverty eradication and sustainability in today's world. I would hope that we would have a merging process, that these tracks will merge. My final comment before I ask the panelists some questions is that if we are to achieve progress on poverty eradication and sustainability, I have an extremely strong belief in the power of institutions and the power of infrastructure and investing in our own people. If I may be a bit personal and talk about my own country, I grew up in a family where I'm the first one to graduate in Sweden. Sweden was one of Europe's poorest countries, not the world's, in the 1920s and 30s. We were the third poorest country in Europe. What changed? It was in the 1930s when we invested in 3 things: good and strong, and I would say honest, institutions, A. B, good and strong infrastructure. C, a massive investment in education. Those were the 3 strategic steps, and within 30 years or so, we were among the most prosperous and, I would say, equitable societies in Europe. You could even, now it's not a joke, you could even win an election on proposals to raise taxes, because we knew that by good institutions, good infrastructure, we got something for the tax money. I wouldn't go that far today. I mean, that's probably not today, but in the 50s and 60s, that was possible. So my last point is that not only do we have to have a direction on poverty eradication and sustainability, we also need to have a direction on rule of law and the rights perspective, so that you have vehicles for change in the future. So this would be my introduction, but I also want to come back to my basic point. You, in this room, you and your countries, will have a key role. If you see what is the Prime Minister of Timor-Leste called the Asian century, and see this shift, you can also understand the importance that your contributions will have to the global agenda. So the kind of discussion that you are having on the road ahead, which factors are to be brought into the new post-2015 agenda, is going to be extremely important. That's why I'm very grateful to Noeleen Heyzer that you arranged this dialogue with such excellent panelists. So with the understanding of my too long introduction, I would like now to start to ask the first questions to our distinguished panelists. I will start with a question to His Excellency Mr. Gordon Darcy-Lilo, the Prime Minister of Solomon Islands. My question to you is the following. I understand that you have recently participated in a roundtable on Pacific issues on the post-2015 development agenda hosted in Dili by the government of Timor-Leste with the support of ESCAP. Could you please share with us some key recommendations, especially on ocean economies, sustainable development of marine resources, and how can these issues be reflected, in your view, in the post-2015 development agenda? Mr. Prime Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Yersin. Fellow panelists, distinguished audience, I'd like to first of all thank the Executive Secretary of the ESCAP for inviting me to this session, and in particular to participate in this panel.
Speak closer to the phone.
And especially to participate in this panel. I was moved by some of the statements made this morning on the kind of challenge that the Asia-Pacific region is faced with. And I was just wondering to my own self, how are we going to get ourselves out of the situation that we are faced with now? But let me come back to the question that has been asked. In Dili, I made 6 recommendations. First was that I noted that in post-2015 agenda, we must build on the success that we have made on the Millennium Development Goals. But at the same time, we need to make a connectivity to the Sustainable Development Goal agenda that we have now identified and mapped out. We have now realized the obvious gap. And the gap is that there's nothing wrong with the Millennium Development Goal. These are very good social indicators. But I think it needs to be really grounded on a more holistic approach to development. And it is just so great that we've been able to have the whole Sustainable Development Conference that was held last year to be able to point to the kind of connectivity that we need to do to be able to build on the successes that we have with the agendas on the Millennium Development Goals. I also noted the point on sustainable growth is required to support social indicators. And this is where we need to have a real participation and a more equitable participation in the whole agenda of sustainable growth. Yashin raised the issue about the real dangers that we are facing, inequality. But I think the real danger that we are facing is inequity. Inequity that we have never been able to give a space to be able to ensure that there is an equitable arrangement that we need to deal with, or that we need to work with, or that we need to have to be able to have a successful engagement in the kind of economic development program that we should have. I also made a point about the green growth sustainable development, which is so essential for developing countries and fragile states. Green growth, I think, brings a new dimension to the whole development, that we bring governance right down to communities, communities that need to focus on real development with people and the environment, strengthening governance from grassroots level right up to the state level. In order for the state institution to be effective, you've got to have a good supporting governance right down at the grassroots level. And that brings me to the next issue that I raised in Delhi about an effective governance structure that must run its full length from the state institution right down to the human community level or at the rural level. In Asia-Pacific region, we are the foundation of our society is the rural economy. It's a rural economy. I've heard about the fundament of our economy since 1997. For instance, when I first attended the Board of Governors meeting of the Asian Development Bank. At that time, we were told and we were warned that Asia and the Pacific region are home to 2/3 of the world's poor. But this morning I still heard that we are still home to 2/3 of the world's poor. Well, we need to see why that has always, why it still remains. Why can't we make a difference? Why aren't we making a difference? This is where we need to look into better governance, governance of our institutions right up from the state right down to the rural level. I also noted that peace and development must be the cornerstone of our development post-2015, and that service delivery must continue. But let me come back to the point that I mentioned, the second point on sustainable growth. In terms of the ocean nations, let me say this to this distinguished audience over here, that our ocean resources must form the basis of our economy. Our ocean resources must form the basis of our economy. We need, as an ocean nation state, we need to rely on these ocean resources to be able to sustain growth in our economies. And this is where we have been facing a lot of inequity in the dealings of our ocean resources. We are faced with this real challenge because in the past we have seen arrangements in the development and the harvesting of our ocean resources that are very much inequitable on our part. We need a better path to be able to give us a fair space to be able to have a more equitable dealing in the harvesting of our ocean resources. If that is possible, if that is made possible, I'm sure we will be able to talk about sustainable development post-2015. This is how I see the threats that have been facing our ocean nations. Unfortunately, we have not been given that space. For instance, we have been living on the arrangement, excess fee arrangement, for instance, that has not been giving us a fair return, maximizing return to the ocean stage. And therefore, the problem that we have continued to face right now, not being able to sustainably manage the implementation of most of the targeted activities under the Millennium Development Goal. Sorry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister. My second question is to Dr. Thongloun Sisoulith, Deputy Prime Minister of the Lao PDR. Mr. Deputy Prime Minister, Laos has provided leadership to the landlocked and least developed countries. It recently hosted the review meeting of the Almaty Programme of Action, and the outcome was adopted as a Vientiane Consensus in March 2013. Could you outline, Mr. Prime Minister, some key recommendations relevant for the post-2015 development agenda from the perspective of the landlocked countries, and how can the landlocked countries harness their potential and become land bridges and transport hubs connecting countries through land transport corridors for shared prosperity?
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Secretary General of UN, distinguished panelists, delegates. The government of the Lao PDR, in cooperation with the UNESCAP and OHRLLS and UNECE, host the Asian European Final Regional Review of the Amati Program of Action from 5th to 7th March 2013 in Vientiane, Laos. This regional final review discussed the issues related to specific conditions and special needs of the LLDC, including measures to address these challenges, and adopted the Vientiane Consensus, which provides important Asia-Europe regional inputs for the global review in 2014. As we all are aware, LLDCs are recognized as one of the most vulnerable groups among members of the United Nations due to their geographical disadvantaged locations, their special challenges and major development obstacles are resulted from the great distance from world markets, limited infrastructure, weak institutional and productive capacities, small domestic markets, high level vulnerability to external shocks, minimal participation in the multilateral trading system, undiversified and narrow range of export products, primarily commodities and low competitiveness. However, the report of the Secretary General A/67/210 show that LLDC experiences a decrease of 12% in inflows of foreign direct investment in 2010, external debt as a percentage of gross national income decreased from 47% in 2009 to 43% in 2010. The LLDC continue to be vulnerable to external shock resulting from global crisis in the area of food, fuel, and finance. As the result of the regional review meeting, the Vientiane Consensus called for comprehensive transit policies in landlocked and transit developing countries by first, developing sustainable transport as a priority area of action to exploit cross-border trade and investment opportunities. Secondly, establish efficient transit transport system between landlocked and transit developing countries by enhancing public-private partnerships. Thirdly, deepening regional economic integration to harmonize, simplify, and standardize procedures for international transit transport. Four, enabling LLDC to expanding products and services and diversifying their export base. Lastly, promoting trade capacity and enhancing trade facilitation by building productivities, capacities, and diversifying produce base. These recommendations are of great importance and relevance for the ongoing discussion on the post-2015 development agenda and sustainable development from the perspective of landlocked countries. Against this backdrop, at this 69 Commission session, the Lao PDR as a chair of the group of LLDCs has tabled a draft resolution entitled Implementation of the Program of Action for the LLDC for the decade 2003 to 2013 in Asia-Pacific region for consideration and adoption, and I would like to request all members of UNSCAP to extend their vulnerable support and co-sponsor this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Prime Minister. And I now turn to Her Excellency, Ms. Amelia Pires, Finance Minister of Timor-Leste. Madam, Timor-Leste, not least under your leadership, exercises strong leadership of the G7 Plus group of fragile states. You have recently hosted the Dili Conference on the post-2015 development agenda, supported by ESCAP. You also serve as member of the Secretary-General's high-level panel on the post-2015 development agenda, and I understand that the Dili consensus adopted at the G7 Plus conference emphasizes, and this is the very important point, that countries emerging from conflicts have weak state capacities and require development partnerships based on mutual trust and less so on conditionalities. Could you please elaborate, Madam Minister?
Thank you very much, Deputy Secretary General, members, panelists, ladies and gentlemen. What we meant to say when we said that our countries that often is of weak capacities require development partnerships based on mutual trust, not on conditionalities, is because normally countries emerging from conflict face numerous and very unpredictable challenges. On the one hand, we could be talking, we're actually facing very complex issues such as dealing with formal or informal military militias, or we're trying to affect service delivery, we are trying to give sense of hope to our youth, and at the same time building government machinery that people can trust. And on the other hand, we face the same kind of global challenges that everybody else faces, such as changes in food prices, financial crisis, climate changes, etc. Now, all these things can harm the efforts of peace and stability and can jeopardize the longer-term aim of economic and social development. So what does that mean on the ground for the government officials? It means that we have constantly to reprioritize or reassess our priorities. And this is very difficult to do because very often we only have a small pool of people that are working on these core issues due to our limited capacity and support. And this is why we say conditionality does not work, because conditionality assumes that things stay stable and that therefore priorities do not change. When in post-conflict countries, the opposite is true. Every day things are changing. And so we can't stop working on some aspect of institution building. We actually have to do that to resolve other pressing issues that may derail the whole thing that we are doing. And so when we do that, what happens is that our development partners may think that we've kind of deviated from what we were supposed to do, or maybe that the reform that we were supposed to implement is going too slow, or maybe it's not going at all. And this is why we say that things need to be based on trust. They need to trust us, because we on the ground, we need to kind of assess when we can do some things. Things are not just technically. There is political stuff that we need to be aware of. And sometimes, some kind of reforms, you can't just do it because the environment, the political environment is not conducive for it. Because if you actually do it, you may trigger more instability. So all these things have to be balanced. And donors very often do not have this understanding, because they're not out there. And many of these things are kind of subtle as well. So people don't actually go and speak about it. So you do need to have trust in those people that you think that they are going to do it, and then support them and let them do it. I think my own country, Timor-Leste, I myself went through these challenges. We don't have a lot of time as well to bring our donors up to date of every little thing that we are doing, because every day we are actually fighting fires. It took us in Timor-Leste about 3 years after the major conflict that we had in 2006. It took us like 3 years before we could actually launch our strategic development plan, which gives a longer term roadmap, which many of our development partners were asking for it, for directions. But in fact, for the first 3 years, we needed to be very, very flexible. So that's what we meant by that sentence.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. And my next question goes to Her Excellency Dr. Jiku Luveni, Minister of Social Welfare, Women and Poverty Alleviation of Fiji. And let me say that I'm very proud to be on a perfect gender balanced panel, by the way. It's very rare in today's world, but it's growingly going to be the case. So my question to you is, G77 has been an important grouping, and you are the chair of it, that has constantly brought development perspective on the issues being discussed or negotiated in the United Nations and other forums. Representing Fiji and the chairmanship of G77, I would like you to brief us briefly about the engagement of G77 on the discussion on post-2015 development agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, and some key issues you would like to highlight in the ongoing debate and see included in the emerging framework.
Thank you. The moderator, the Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, our fellow panelists, excellencies, and distinguished delegates. Before responding to the questions raised, I would like to register my appreciation to the Executive Secretary of ESCAP for the invitation to be a member of this ministerial panel. Thank you. My intervention will specifically focus on the G77 plus China ongoing discussions on the way forward to ensure an inclusive and robust process and mechanisms are in place for the post-2015 development agenda and sustainable development goals. This is to ensure that all our collective vision and implementation modalities are vibrant and owned nationally. From Rio Plus 20 and now in Bangkok, I am pleased that there is a genuine degree of urgency and long-term commitment to work together in achieving the implementation of Rio+20 outcome. Fiji, as chair of G77 plus China, has assumed the functional requirements of its role since January this year. It is indeed a challenging role given the myriad of global, regional, and national issues confronting us today in our development agenda. As chair, Fiji will need your unwavering support and commitment to see this through. On the post-2015 development agenda, firstly, at the moment, the national governments are not directly involved in the design process for the post-2015 development agenda. However, most G77 plus China members have participated in many thematic debates taking place in a number of international and regional forums prior to the 69th session of the Commission. The intention is to give preparatory leverage for G77 plus China members prior to any UN-sanctioned intergovernmental consultative process that will be called upon in the not-too-distant future. Secondly, the engagement of the G77 plus China to the discussion on the post-2015 development and sustainable development goals will be centered on the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 65/1 in support of the Secretary General to make appropriate recommendations to address the UN Development Agenda that are critical and relevant to G77 plus China members. Our approach will be on genuine dialogue and mutual respect for the sovereignty of member states. In the spirit of respect and genuine collaboration with all G77 members, we will work very closely with the UN Secretary General appointed task force team and high-level panel of eminent persons on the post-2015 development agenda being undertaken in Fiji next week to provide the necessary support to the Sustainable Development Solution Network. In this regard, it is critically important to launch an intergovernmental process as soon as practicable so that the future development agenda is owned and shaped by the member states themselves. This is very much in line with our commitment when we assumed the chairmanship of the G77 plus China earlier this year. Our commitment is based on the principle of inclusiveness, genuine dialogue, and equal opportunities for all. Having said all that, it is worth noting that a paradigm shift in our transformative approach for development is necessary and should be centered on rights-based, equitable, and environmental sustainability. The post-2015 development agenda should be framed within a set of goals that are commensurate with a broad view of social justice and social solidarity, paying particular attention to the well-being of developing countries and the limits to the environment. The coverage will have to be expanded beyond the domain of donor communities, draw on other financial resources, include South-South cooperation, and address the prominent role of emerging countries to tackle policy and structural issues based on domestic priorities and ownership. This is imperative to avoid the potential mismatch between grand political ambitions and declarations that would likely emerge at the UN level, coupled with the political and vested interests, and to follow through with concrete actions. We believe that the starting point of the post-2015 development agenda should ideally be an assessment of what has really worked with the MDG framework and what has failed. Based on these assessments, we will be in a position to prepare a better focused and targeted network. At this juncture, I would like to give an overview on the status of Fiji's experience in its efforts to achieve the MDGs. For Fiji, based on the second MDG report published in 2010 for the review period 1990 to 2009, highlighted that we are on track to achieve 5 of the 8 goals. These 5 goals include MDG 2 on achieving universal primary education, MDG 4 and 5 on reducing child mortality and maternal mortality respectively, MDG 7 to ensure environmental sustainability, and MDG 8 on developing a global partnership for development. We will still need to work on the 3 remaining goals. Despite the major challenges, we remain steadfast on our commitment to achieve the Millennium Development Goals in collaboration with all stakeholders and our development partners. On the Sustainable Development Goals, allow me to touch on the much debated issue of Sustainable Development Goals in the various UN-sanctioned fora thus far. At the moment, the G77 plus China is very much active in its discussions on the formulation of the SDGs. Today, the Open Working Group, OWG, on SDGs, held its second formal session on 17 to 18 April, focusing on a conceptualization debate of sustainable development and poverty alleviation. The third formal session of the OWG is scheduled for 22 to 24th May. The issues to be discussed include food security and nutrition, sustainable agriculture, drought and desertification, land degradation, water and sanitation. All these issues were identified by the G77 plus China as relevant in the context of sustainable development. Other relevant issues and commitment from the Rio Plus 20 outcome, among others, are health and population, macroeconomic issues including trade and debt, employment and decent work for all, social protection, youth and education, special needs of least development countries, landlocked developing countries, small island developing states, and Africa, and promoting equality, including social equity, gender equality, and women's empowerment, conflict, peace, and security. Most importantly, climate change and disaster risk reduction in oceans, forests, and biodiversity are very critical for the survival of SIDS. The G77 plus China has placed great emphasis to the special event on the review of the MDGs, scheduled for 25 September 2013, at the margins of the high-level segment of the UNGA. Some countries are of the view that ideally, a President's summary should form the basis of an outcome document. The G77 is of the strong view that this special event is very much relevant to the development needs of developing countries, and that the outcome document must be intergovernmentally agreed to provide the foundation and the necessary legal and binding status it truly deserves within the UN system. This is the challenge before the G77 plus China now. To conclude, Fiji, as the current chair of the G77, is of the view that it is imperative that the effectiveness of any multilateral framework impinges on the political ability, willingness, and commitment of all country states to work together in collaboration to achieve the desired outcome. Despite our diversity in status, culture, geography, and different stages of development, we still need our shared collective responsibility of sustaining our planet Earth for prosperity. Honorable panelists, moderator, excellencies, and distinguished delegates, I thank you for your patience.
Madam Minister, and the last question goes to Dr. Daggubati Purandeshwari, Minister of State for Commerce and Industry of India. Madam Minister, India has achieved great economic and social progress, but still, as it recognizes itself, faces a huge challenge to provide satisfactory living standards to millions of people. India has, of course, a high stake in the discussion on the post-2015 development agenda, and the voices of 1.2 billion people needs to be heard and factored into the ongoing discussions. Could you share India's perspective on the post-2015 development agenda and the Rio +20 outcome? You may also like to talk about constraints that developing countries might face in implementation of this agenda. Madam Minister.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, distinguished panelists, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Let me at the onset begin by saying that it's indeed a great privilege for me to be representing my country, India, here in the presence of such distinguished audiences. And may I also congratulate our host, Dr. Noeleen Heyzer, for having narrowed down on a very relevant topic of which all of us need to ponder upon, which is the development goals post 2015. Going back to my country, India, we always believed in growth, which laid focus greatly on sustainability and inclusivity. And it has not been at one forum, but at different fora that our Prime Minister, Dr. Manmohan Singh, had repetitively emphasized that India needs to grow fast. She needs development, fast development, but development that would percolate down to every citizen living in the remotest area of the country and belonging to the last rung of society. Well, even as we begin to ponder on what we need to focus on, there has been a great and a large debate on how the world has changed. But I think what we need to actually question ourselves is why the world has not changed. Because the debate on whether the world has changed or not would largely marginalize the question on why the world has not changed. Changed world argument conveniently overlooks the vast socio-economic development issues which the developing nations still face even to this day. Poverty, deprivation, hunger, inequality, gender inequality, education, health, all of this continue to plague, all these issues continue to plague the developing nations and the countries of the South. And therefore, in the name of the changing world, I do not think that we need to lose focus on what needs to be changed in the developing world. And we also should remember that the mandate of the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, UNCSD, also called Rio +20, must be fully respected. And those objectives or initiatives that were rejected at the Rio +20 should not be reintroduced as the agenda post-2015. And the principles of common but differentiated responsibilities and equities, these principles must form the bedrock of the agenda for development post-2015. We also must remember that that the objective of development must have its roots in poverty eradication, which is very important both for employment generation as well as for social inclusion for developing nations. And first and foremost, what is most significant is that we must all recognize that the MDGs were very simple, and the MDGs succeeded because the agenda was kept short and implementable. And that should be the focus even as we set our agenda for development post-2015, which means the practicality and the implementality of the agenda for development post-2015 must not lose focus. The key weakness of the MDGs was that even they continued, even as it purported to constitute a global agenda in effect, it was more applicable to the developing nations than the developed nations, in the sense that it was only goal 8 of the MDGs which was applicable to the developed nations, which spoke of global partnerships and did not have any monitorable targets and indicators. As such, a truly global agenda is essential for post-2015. Consequently, post-2015 framework should apply both to the developed as well as the developing countries, so as to create a more equitable set of responsibilities and obligations. The post-2015 development agenda must equally focus for developing countries to implement the agenda. The availability of additional resources, technological support, and capacity building assistance is key if we have to achieve success in what we would set for ourselves as goals for development post-2015. And this would bring to the fore the discussion and debate on the South-South and North-South cooperation and collaboration. We must not forget that the terminology South-South cooperation was actually brought forth to keep in mind the fact that probably nations in the southern hemisphere would rather share their experiences, their knowledge, and do a bit of hand-holding with each other rather than look at whether we can resourcefully support our agenda. However, in the recent years, there is the apprehension that the South-South collaboration could marginalize and probably would probably see the Northern Hemisphere shirk away its responsibility of resourcefully supporting the Southern Hemisphere. And therefore, we must not forget that the South-South collaboration can only be a supplement rather than a supplant to the North-South cooperation, because the resources are very essential and important for us to ensure that we implement and we successfully implement the agenda that we will be setting for ourselves as the development goals post-2015. There has also been a great focus on peace and security, but however, this has actually taken the global development narrative in the recent years. But however, developing nations would like to emphasize that this cannot be made a preponderant focus of the development agenda. Climate change is also a defining challenge for the developing nations and is definitely a keen interest in the post-development agenda for 2015. But however, we know for a fact that under the Durban platform, which was agreed at COP17 in Durban in 2012, negotiations have been launched. Therefore, to bring it back into agenda of development post-2015 would need to be taken with a note of caution. Again, there is a strong push for global agenda with global responsibilities, meaning larger roles for the developing countries to also contribute resources and thus weakening the responsibility of the North-South collaboration. Therefore, the resourceful collaboration amongst the nations or the economies or the developing countries in the Southern Hemisphere should not mean that the developed countries in the Northern Hemisphere stop supporting the agenda that we are going to set for ourselves. And therefore, I think largely this is what we would think from India is the concern that we would like to bring to the fore and would like to see as the center of focus and deliberations in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. We now have about 20 minutes for questions from the world. We know that this is being webcast all over the world, so I will just read out 3 Twitter questions. If we didn't prove that we live in a new world earlier, I think I'm doing it now. The 3 Twitter questions that I received is one from Kazakhstan, which asks the following question. How can we involve more young people to express their views on the sustainable development post-2015? The second question, maybe you could take note for your final remarks. Second question is, the source is not indicated, but the question is, for Afghanistan, the security is a major challenge to reach MDGs. How can we deal with this in the development agenda beyond 2015? I think it relates to Emilia's comments earlier. And the last one on Twitter that I read out here is from Delhi. How can regional cooperation strengthen the post-2015 development agenda? So these three questions will remain with us, and then I will also ask from the member states to pose their questions. I have on the list first China and Nepal. China, you have the floor.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary Eliasson. Thank you, Deputy Secretary Eliasson. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to attend today's panel discussion. This is the first time that I attend the annual session of the Commission. I find this discussion very useful. I've listened to your remarks. I find them very inspiring. In my view, you have put forward important ideas on how to achieve sustainable development from your own perspective. And at the beginning of the discussions, Mr. Eliasson talked about your dream. And in this connection, I want to talk about how to realize the beautiful dream of development and prosperity. 13 years ago, leaders across the world gathered together at the UN headquarters in New York on the threshold of the new millennium and jointly issued the Millennium Declaration. And this declaration charted an ambitious blueprint for economic and social development across the world. We have made tremendous efforts for the attainment of the MDGs, and positive achievements have been made. At the same time, we should be aware of the problems, including unemployment, food, energy, and resources security, and we still face a lot of challenges to realize MDGs on time. Then how can we achieve the goals and realize the dream of development and prosperity? I want to put forward the following 3 points. First, we should take the on-time attainment of MDGs as our top priority. Asia-Pacific countries should scale up input, expand areas of cooperation, promote trade and investment liberalization and facilitation, and regional economic integration, so as to broaden space for development of all countries. We should also coordinate our positions and take an active part in setting the post-2015 International Development Agenda. Based on our national realities and development experience, we should make post-2015 development agenda an institutional guarantee for advancing the development of the Asia-Pacific countries and uphold their development interests. Second, I believe that we should follow a sustainable development path that suits us. Sustainable development is essential for lasting prosperity. We should achieve a proper balance between economic growth and environmental protection. Incorporate environmental indicators into the evaluation system for national and regional economic and social development. Speed up the shift of the growth model. strike a balance between economic and social development and environmental protection, and advance sustainable development of resources and the environment in all countries in the region. At the same time, frequent disasters in this region are also reminding us that more efforts should be made to enhance disaster mitigation and prevention capabilities. Third, let me say that we should push for the building of a new global development partnership that is more equitable and balanced, and stay committed to the real principles, especially the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. We need to put into place an effective international framework of sustainable development that gives the developing countries a bigger say and greater decision-making power, and meet their immediate needs in funding, technology, and capacity building. Meanwhile, we should uphold North-South cooperation as the main vehicle of global partnership. Developed countries should honor their commitments to provide official development aid and step up financial and technical support for developing countries. As a developing country, China has long been committed to pursuing sustainable economic and social development and has made good progress in meeting the MDGs. In the process of development, like other countries, China faces problems of unbalanced, uncoordinated, and unsustainable development. China is now working hard to realize its dream of completing the building of a moderately prosperous society in all respects and turning China into a prosperous, strong, democratic, culturally advanced, and harmonious modern socialist country. The Chinese dream, in essence, is all about development. The 1.3 billion Chinese people, by pursuing their dream of development and progress, will make distinguished contribution to the development endeavor of people in Asia-Pacific and beyond. And we are ready to join other countries in this region beyond to achieve the MDGs and set the agenda for the post-2015 development issues. I'm convinced that we will have an even brighter future, and our beautiful dream of common development and prosperity will come true. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. I think we need to limit the questions or comments to 3 minutes, and if we are to comment on the questions also from Twitter, I'm really sorry to say that we probably have to draw a line here. But Nepal first, of course. You asked for the floor first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Firstly, I would like to thank the honorable panelists for the insights shared. I am pleased to share some highlights of the recently concluded Asian and Pacific Regional Implementation Meeting, or RIM, on Rio Plus 20 outcomes as the rapporteur. The RIM was convened by ISCAP in collaboration with UNEP and the ADB on 22nd to 24th April 2013 in Bangkok. It was attended by more than 170 participants, including government representatives from 36 governments and 41 representatives from civil society and business. Over the 3 days, participants discussed the institutional framework for sustainable development goals, and the post-2015 development agenda, means of implementation, and other aspects of Rio Plus 20 follow. The meeting was marked by strong commitment to regional cooperation for sustainable development. The Rio principles were strongly highlighted, in particular, the principle of common but differentiated responsibility. Regional cooperation and global partnerships were also stressed. The meeting shared views, experiences, and challenges of the region in all the 3 dimensions of sustainable development: economic, social, and environmental, and the interrelationship between them. Important challenges identified for the region include poverty, climate change and related impacts, sovereign debt, energy security and water resource management, low levels of MDG achievements related to gender equality, and health and food insecurity. Dialogue on the Sustainable Development Goals and the post-2015 development agenda was particularly rich. The majority of meeting participants emphasized the need for sustainable and equitable development agenda and urgent attention to poverty reduction. Without prejudging the outcomes of the ongoing discussions, many delegates expressed support for a unified development agenda with a post-2015 development agenda with sustainable development as its core. ISCAP's role as a regional platform in promoting sustainable development, as reflected by the Rio+20 outcome document and reflecting the needs of the region, was strongly recognized by almost every delegation. Several recommendations were made for ISCAP's role. It included an emphasis on UN system coherence and collaboration that are highly relevant to the review of ISCAP's conference structure in addition to the current discussion. I would urge member states and the Secretariat to take steps to rise to the expectations expressed by the meeting. The Regional Implementation Meeting adopted a report with a chair summary capturing the perspectives of ISCAP's stakeholders on regional follow-up for Rio+20 outcome. I thank you, sir, for your time and attention.
Thank you very much. We will try to maintain the interactive character. The representative of Bangladesh and Bhutan, could you ask your questions within a 2-minute period, you think, so that we can enjoy lunch? Thank you.
I shall do it in 1 minute.
Wonderful. You will get a premium.
I'm absolutely delighted, and thank you for a very, very thoughtful set of ideas. My question is to both our friend and neighbor, the Honorable Minister from India. She actually touched on a very important issue which had been skirted around about the South-South cooperation. South-South cooperation has always been envisaged as a major instrument in providing the impetus for development. And that its importance does continue, and I wouldn't in any way underestimate. I also entirely agree with you while we talk about South-South cooperation. We should not ignore or let go the responsibility of the developed world. In fact, in a way, it is a shame that when the Millennium Development Goals had been outlined, there was a great expectation that substantial transfer of resources would happen from north to south. But that said, Honorable Minister, what I do want to ask you is India has already started playing an enormously important role. Like China, like Turkey, India is one of the great rising economies. We in Bangladesh have already experienced your generosity, your help, your assistance. But I'd like to hear from you as you contemplate setting up the BRICS Bank, as the Indian economy expands. What sort of role do you envisage in South-South cooperation? Essentially, just to hear your views, I would have asked the same question had our Chinese friend been on the panel there.
Thank you very much. Could we have an equally brief question from Bhutan so that we could possibly give a last chance to a third speaker that I have here in waiting, but we'll see how we end up. Ambassador.
Thank you.
Minister, sorry.
Thank you very much, Distinguished Deputy Secretary General of UN. Thank ISCAP for organizing this important panel discussion, and our thanks equally go to the insightful remarks of the distinguished panelists. Now, in order to preserve our friendship, Mr. Deputy Secretary General, I need to be very brief. I had cut my comments down and down, but let me say that Bhutan continues to emphasize the importance of the window of opportunity that the post-2015 agenda presents to put us on a trajectory of sustainable development guided by a higher vision of happiness. Our view is that sustainable development is about survival of mankind. It is about how we, as a species, must live within the bounds of what nature can provide. Sustainable development is not a choice. It is an absolute necessity. As Bhutan continues to work and follow closely the discussions on the 2015 Development Agenda, we look forward to making our contributions to the global discourse, including through our membership on the General Assembly Open Working Group on SDGs. I would like to just briefly touch on the General Assembly's adoption of in July 2011 of Resolution 65/309 entitled Happiness Towards a Holistic Approach to Development, which has encouraged us to work further towards the articulation of a new development paradigm. We hope that the discussion in this important panel discussion would give us more clarity to this effort, as Bhutan would continue to contribute to this important discussion. With that, I think my 2 minutes is up. Thank you very much for your patience.
Thank you very much. The last question will be raised by the Islamic Republic of Iran, and the shorter you keep your comments, the more chance you will give the panel to respond.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations and distinguished panelists. In this regard, the Islamic Republic of Iran believes that inclusiveness and justice are the main issues to be considered for the development agenda behind 2015. It seems that the challenges we are facing now is because of the lack of the consideration of the above-mentioned strategic issues. To establish a fair and efficient future for the people of the region, we need to pay attention to the following pillars. 1, relying and enhancing the role of the people in the economic and social activities. 2, removing barriers to access the international markets for developing countries. 3, facilitating transfer of knowledge and technology to developing countries. 4, developing regional and international cooperation. The open question to the panelists is how we can adjust development planning principle and redefine its approaches to be able to contribute to sustainable development and the development agenda behind 2015. Thank you.
Thank you very much. This concludes the question period, and I apologize to delegations that had the intention of asking questions. This shows the importance of the subject, that there were several interested, and I also apologize to the NGO representatives who also had questions. But in the interest of listening to the answers to some of the questions, I will now give 1 minute each to, it's a challenge, isn't it? 1 minute each to the panelists, and I start from my left with Emilia Pires, if you want to comment on any of the questions raised, and then I will see whether I have anything to respond in the end. Thank you.
Thank you. Perhaps if I could just address the question on Afghanistan, given that Afghanistan is a member of the G7 Plus group of nations. We, after a certain analysis and discussions, we came up with 5 peace-building, state-building goals as the bridging. We felt that MDGs did not address these goals, and we came up with it. And one of them is security. But when we define security, we are talking more about safety, about how to make sure the citizen is safe so that the citizen can actually, if it is a child, can actually attend school. A teacher can actually go to school to teach it. A patient can actually go to the hospital and address the illness. And the other question, the other issue that we also raised is the inclusiveness. We believe that you need to allow everybody to participate in the politics. So it's not just one thing. It's an integrated group of things. Another one is jobs, especially for the young unemployed people, because if you look at those countries, mainly, well, I don't know about others, but those that are in the G7 Plus, we have a youth bulge. And most of the time, people have no skills, and therefore no jobs, and therefore what are they going to do? So if you address all this, it may help mitigate this. Last but not least, many of us are resource-rich countries. So if we, right from the beginning, ensure that we get a fair share of the return of our natural resources, then perhaps we ourselves can finance the basic services for our people, and then slowly move towards not being so dependent on aid. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Deputy Prime Minister Sisolit abstains from answering, which saves more time for some of you others here. I'll turn to Gordon Darcy-Lillo, please.
Thank you, Moderator. Smallest country in the panel, maybe responding to the biggest country who have made a comment on China. I'm really interested in that topic on trade liberalization and integration. I think it is a way out to be able to engage within the Asia-Pacific region. But I think the question that we need to ask here is whether or not we will still be able to not to, perpetuate, the whole inequality that we are experiencing. This is what we need to map out properly. If the whole arrangement can, reach out to eliminating inequality and ensuring that a fair delivery and a good deliverable may be able to promote development in the smallest countries within the Asia-Pacific region, then fine. That is my comment to that. In terms of institutionalizing 2015 as a target, for sustainable development, but that's still not remove the whole commitment that we should have right now to be able to engage all countries in each effort to look within their own capacity to be able to deliver. I think what we need to have is a more effective engagement, a more creative partnership arrangement that will be able to allow countries to be able to map out, the kind of development that is required within their own jurisdiction, and allow for, as what India has said, a good flow of resources north to south to be able to deliver to those that may not have that space now. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you very much. Dr. Loreni, please.
Thank you. I'd like to just address the issue on the involvement of young people. And to answer that, I will just tell a story. When I was the executive director of the Fiji Network for People Living with HIV, and people who are living with HIV actually came public with their status, I thought I'll draw up a program for their capacity building. And I drew up certain topics, basic facts about, this is about 10, 15 years ago, basic facts about HIV/AIDS, how the HIV evolved, and all these things that I thought they wanted to know. But at the end of the training, they were really not interested. I told them, well, why don't you draw up your own program? So they came up with programs such as, we would like to know how to grow vegetables. Because of our status, we are not employed and we need to grow our own. We are people with poverty. We also want to learn how to do exercises because our bodies are getting weak and we need. We'd like to also know the type of food that we can eat and the herbal medicine that we can use because we cannot afford Western medicine. I guess the point I'm trying to say is when we hear the voices of the young people, then we will be able to strengthen their partnership and involve them in opportunities where they could be involved in the development process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister Purandeshwari, please.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to answer the question that has been raised by the Honorable Member from Bangladesh. Well, let me emphasize here that both the range and the quantum of the South-South cooperation has expanded significantly. And India shares the aspiration of progress and development along with the other founding principles of our nation right since the beginning. And to give just a couple of examples, our flagship capacity building program, which is called the Indian over 161 countries in the southern hemisphere or from the developing nations. Along with this, we also offer around 2,300 scholarships for students who are willing to come so that we could support these students who are really aspiring for good qualitative interventions. And we also have helped to impart an impetus to infrastructure development through more than 150 lines of credit, almost to a tune of 9.5 billion US dollars. So this is the kind of cooperation that we would love to see as part of South-South collaboration. But however, this should not put on the same, or rather looked upon as par with the North-South collaboration. Because the resources are definitely very important for us, and you have rightly emphasized that the flow of funds from the north down south did not really live up to the aspirations of the southern hemisphere. So they cannot be looked upon as supplementing each other, but rather should be considered supplementing each other rather than supplant each other, as I had mentioned earlier. But one thing is for sure, Mr. Chairman, which I would like to take this opportunity to emphasize, is that even as we are setting our development goals post-2015, wider consultations must be considered, because even as we set our MDGs, I do not think there was the kind of wide consultations specific, because the challenges and issues that country faces within themselves is very different, and therefore I think we must have country-specific plan of action that needs to be put in place. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister. There is not a chance in the world to summarize this discussion, but let me first of all thank my fellow panelists, and thank you, member states, and thank the audience out there in the world, thanks to modern technology, to be part of this conversation. I said at the beginning that Asia has a special responsibility and a chance to influence the agenda, the global agenda, with your growing role in all respects. And I think this, this panel discussion shows the maturity and sense of responsibility that you feel about the future. And I can tell you, speaking from the global and New York perspective, that we really expect strong contributions from you, and constructive and productive ones, where you point out the fact that national efforts have to go together with regional efforts, and they in turn are part of global efforts. And what we perhaps in the end may achieve is that the good regional solution, the good international solution, is in the end seen as a national interest. If we can take away the false borderline between national and international, then we are really home. Then we have fulfilled our dreams, I would say. I think this panel, without really having planned it this way, but I'm sure Nolan Heiser planned it this way, we have here received the perspective from the small island states, the existential threat to our planet, not least brought out by you, Gordon. And then also we have the landlocked countries from the Laos perspective, and the need for a regional context for you to thrive and develop. We have the post-conflict situations that Emilia Perez so eloquently has presented, and you pointed out something of which I am very proud as former President of the General Assembly, that there is no peace without development, and no development without peace. And by the way, no lasting peace or sustainable development without respect of human rights and the rule of law. These are the three pillars. And if one of these pillars is weak, the whole structure is weak. We have to work on these counts simultaneously. Also the G77 perspective, and I want to commend Fiji for its chairmanship. I work very closely with Peter Thompson in New York, and I very much count on the leadership of Fiji in the discussions in New York. You brought out one line that the Prime Minister Gusmao of Timor-Leste used, and I'm going to steal it from you. I'll give you copyright for a year or so, but you said in the end that we have to work for development for all, yes, development for all, but you also said development by all. Development by all, which points to the inclusiveness that is requested for so many sides. If we don't have a process which brings in the young people, brings in those vulnerable in our countries, if our work does not become meaningful and relevant for them, then we have failed. In the end, our results will be counted out there in the field. And let us remember that this extreme poverty, these inequalities are not only unfair, but they are also dangerous. If we can come to that conclusion so that it is in our enlightened self-interest to bring about sustainability, equity, and resilience, then I think we are making great progress. And I think this discussion has really shown that we are in the right direction. I would hope that the post-2015 goals or targets would be very concrete, as was stated earlier, but also that we are bold enough to bring in the qualitative elements that were brought out by some here in our development process. We have to make sure that we have good institutions, good infrastructure, and also giving everybody equal chances. So that quantitative element together with the qualitative is what I would hope would come out of the discussions. And I think this discussion today was a wonderful beginning of this process that will lead to the member states by end of 2014, beginning of 2015, negotiating something which is indeed bold, but at the same time practical and makes a difference for people in the world. So I thank you very much for the honor of being a moderator. I have different roles in my life, but I like this. Thank you very much. It was great.